I'm Tom Canetti and welcome to Uncensored Stories. We're here in Sofia, Bulgaria to talk about the current protests and political situation. We're joined by Sofie and Annie. Thanks for joining us tonight, guys. Why don't we kick things off by talking about the clash between Prime Minister Borisov and President Radev.
Okay, yes.
My pronunciation is going to be terrible throughout this entire
That's
interview.
actually pretty good, so don't worry about it.
Thanks.
So basically what's been happening for the past year, maybe, is this kind of back and forth between the president and the prime minister and the parliament, his parliament. So basically the parliament tries to they take a decision, they try to push a law, and then the president is like, veto, like we're not doing this, which is something that I don't remember happening before, like with the previous presidents, because we've had this prime minister for ages, and so this is something new. I don't remember any examples right now.
The President Radev is somewhat recent, right?
No, it's 4 years already, so he's at the end of his mandate, yeah.
And the Prime Minister?
10 years maybe, or his government, like on and off, but about 10 years he's been in power. Before that he was mayor of Sofia.
Because it seems like the president is taking a hard line against Borisov in trying to sort of like end his regime, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what is the basic difference in beliefs, in ideology, in politics between the Prime Minister and the President? Just to have a Prime Minister and a President in the first place is different from where I come from in Australia, where we only have a Prime Minister. Or maybe in like a republic we just have a President.
I don't think even it's about beliefs, like at any point. It's all a political game kind of, but what some people would say is the difference is, so the Prime Minister is like obviously from the ruling party, GERB, which is like a centrist, center-right party, and the president is from the Socialist Party. But I wouldn't have taken their like clash to be like the reason to be the different parties. It's, to me, I think it's the government has been doing this stuff that the president is like, okay, this is not right, maybe I'm gonna veto this decision or whatever, which is also like has a political reason. Maybe he wants to be in power because the president in Bulgaria doesn't have much power.
Right.
Like at this point he has the power to like just say stuff and be heard.
It's more of a ceremonial position, so he would act more as a representative of the country, but the actual decision making
of the country or the party?
No, he's supposed to be politically neutral.
Yeah, he just comes from that party, but at this point in time, he's not a part of the Socialist Party because he's the president, so he has to be neutral.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a lot of frustration in exactly what you're saying, that he's just sort of a showman to act as if he's against corruption, but there's so many things intertwined with the constitution and in the parliament that doesn't really play into effect, that the Prime Minister isn't really being vetoed out of making any decisions. Is that right, or is that...
He's, as I said, I think there is a political play on his part, but he's saying things that people can like relate to. So because a lot of our, I think we'll get there, but a lot of our media it's not very, like it's biased, right? So you don't get a lot of different opinions about the ruling party. And now we have this figure that you cannot like shut up the president, like he's the president, you have to hear him. And that's why I think he's gotten a lot more popular over the past months during the protests, and before that actually, because he speaks out against the government. I don't know if that's a political play. Maybe it is. Probably it is. He's getting people on his side, but still he says a lot of things that are true.
Yeah.
Like he calls out on like corruption and the oligarchs' involvement in politics in the parliament.
Yeah. Okay, on that, let's talk about these protests. How did they start?
There was a lot of tension before the protests started. We've just had so many political scandals over the past year, and at some point just boiled up and burst out. And the two incidents that caused it were, the first one was when a member of the Yes Bulgaria party they're not in power or anything. They're kind of, they didn't have that much support. They do have more support now. But he tried to land on a public beach, like sail onto a public beach, and he couldn't because one of our oligarchs, Ahmed Dugan, who used to be head of the ethnic party, has his was it like, I don't know, what's it called, like a mansion there. And the beach was guarded by these sketchy people that didn't identify themselves. So the leader of Yes Bulgaria, like when he was trying to go to the beach, there were these sketchy people that was like, no, you can't do this, and they started pushing him in the water. He was streaming the whole thing. And he was asking them, are you from the national security, I'm not sure what it's called, like
NSS.
So the people who are
the military, essentially, right? Like they work for the government there. They're paid by taxpayers.
Yeah, they're paid by taxpayers. So the people who are like the bodyguards of the people in power, that are assigned to people in power. And he was asking, are you from these guys? And they didn't identify themselves because they shouldn't, like if they are, they shouldn't be there, because this guy that they're protecting is not an MP anymore. Like he's not in power in any way. He's not in the parliament. He's so,
and it's a public space.
It's a public
beach, so it's not supposed to be guarded in the first place. So that was doubly problematic.
So that was the first scandal that I think a lot of young people related more to this one, because it was like, okay, this is our land. Like this is if I want to go to this beach, I should be able to, because this is the land of the people. Like this is people's beach. But this guy has his mansion there, and nobody can pass. So that was the first one, and then.
And is that sort of a representation of society in Bulgaria, somewhat about elite oligarchical rule compared to a lot of poverty-stricken areas? Like...
I think that's why it resonated with so many people, because it was just so symbolic and representative of the situation here as a whole. I mean, Bulgaria is, I think it's the most corrupt country, right, in
Europe,
the EU. And then that was just kind of a representation of that, and you could very clearly see it, and you can see that the people in power just kind of do what they want to do, and they utilize state resources that are supposed to be for the public good, right? Both with the, I guess you would call them the secret services or something, I don't know. So the bodyguards, right? And also public beaches. And I think it was especially kind of a touchy matter, because we take great pride in our beaches, right? We love them. That's our great treasure.
The yellow beaches, or the golden beaches?
Well,
popular tourist attraction for UK teenagers.
We just love our beaches, and we want to be able to access them. And so that was just, I think everything blew up a lot there. And I think that's why for young people it was such a big deal.
And is this a historic thing? Like, is there always been an abuse of power between oligarchs or the elite?
For the past 20-30 years, for sure, since we've been in this, I would call it regime, because they call it democracy, but it's not really. But ever since, and maybe before that, actually definitely before that, so socialism and on, it's been like this. The 90s were crazy here, like mafia and.
After the breakup of the Soviet Union.
The second thing that happened after this was, so the president, who had already been in clashes with the prime minister, was like, okay, I'm gonna investigate this. I'm gonna see who these people on the beach were. Like, are they supposed to be there? Are they supposed to be protecting this guy? Is this beach private? Is it public? And he was like, then he did a press conference like, these guys were from the secret service, and they're not supposed to be there. And next thing that happened is Chief Prosecutor Ivan Geshev just sent people into the presidency to
raid
the presidency, which he can't do, because there is what was it called,
some sort of checks and balances,
it's like
The
you
protection.
can't do that. Yeah, there's some sort of protection. Like you can't just raid the president's office,
Yeah.
right? And
There's
there were like
certain procedures that
Yeah.
you need to go through first. You can't just go and raid offices just
and
whenever you please.
Ivan
Yeah.
Geshev, like
And especially when they plant so much stuff. Like I saw someone in the media that got arrested recently, and then there's like they had their CCTV on in their house, and they showed the special forces planting like gold coins, like
yeah,
essentially in the
I didn't know
rooms.
that.
And it's like, what's this? It's like,
Yeah, so that was the second thing that happened, and on that day, like that happened in the morning, on that day, it was the first massive protest. So people organized very quickly, and there was thousands and thousands of people in front of the presidency that day. Some say in support of the president. I think some of them were there in support of the president, but the majority were there just because of the whole situation with. Like we said, this was very representative of how Bulgaria works right now. Of the
And
oligarchs.
I don't even think it was necessarily personally supporting him. It was more
Yeah.
supporting him as the quote-unquote victim in this situation, right? Just because there are certain procedures that need to be followed if you're going to be searching offices. And so people were supporting him just, because of that.
is there an element where it's sort of also persecuting the prime minister as well? It's sort of showing frustration about the prime minister.
No, that's
No?
the thing. So ever since he's been like less than a year in this position, chief prosecutor, there were actually massive protests against his election before he got elected in quotes because he was the only candidate that they put forward. But he's been doing this since he came into this position. Like all of his actions were they were targeting certain people in position, but nobody from the government, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it was very showy. It was all like I think he's using this as just for PR, like he just goes on an action. He doesn't even follow procedure, and he makes a show out of it. So he goes on TV, like all of the media that they're very biased. They're like, this is our chief prosecutor. Like he's saving us. He's our savior. He goes and look. He's chasing the president. He's chasing Boshkov, who is the richest Bulgarian, and something happened with the business. I'm not very competent in that. So but yeah, it's been happening for a long time.
So one of these main points which Radev is sort of like talking in the media of his objective is to take down the mafia, right?
Yeah.
So how prevalent is the mafia in Bulgaria, and what is the difference between like something in a film, the Italian mafia in New York, compared to like how does it actually operate in 2020?
It's
What sort of industries is it involved in? Is it something of just purely financial, or is it like political? How does it work?
It's
All of the above.
yeah. I wouldn't say it's like
Because the street crime here is very low, in general, right? In Sofia,
Yeah, as compared to many countries,
and
yeah.
even Eastern European countries. So like
Yeah.
it seems like you guys obviously tell me, but like it seems like the violence or the corruption is really more at a higher level.
Yeah,
Right?
that's true.
Yeah.
And I would say it's. I'm not sure, but I think it's mostly like into the business world. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely business, it's politics as well. So I think that it's kind of,
Power and money.
yeah, I mean, essentially, which it always does come down to that. But whereas you have the kind of Italian mafia or you have like gang wars and whatever elsewhere, that's not really how it is here. Here, everything just happens at a very high level, usually. So you would have, you need connections for everything. So that's kind of another thing that young people especially take issue with here, is that you need connections to get anything done, right? And so everything
What do you mean by that?
functions. Well, I mean, usually if you want to get a job, your best bet is connections. So knowing
Right.
someone. Of course, that I'm not saying that you cannot get a job otherwise,
Yeah,
but it's very often the case that someone else will be chosen because they're connected to whoever, right?
Right.
So you might be more competent, but someone else might be chosen because they have connections. And so that continues to happen as you go higher up the hierarchy. And it has a lot to do with money, and especially with EU funds. So that's very problematic. And I think they've already now opened investigations into Bulgaria, haven't they, for theft of EU funds.
Yeah, but that was, I think, public pressure because of the protests.
Right. But, you know,
Maybe,
so
yeah.
that is a big part of it, is that a lot of money is coming into Bulgaria from the EU with hopes of developing, say, its agriculture, right? And this money goes somewhere, and you can't really trace it. And I think there was another scandal pretty recently.
I'm not sure. I can give an example, I think, of the EU funds going nowhere during the coronavirus, like when we were all in quarantine, right? In the beginning, the European was like, okay, we don't know how to deal with this, so just give him, like, here's money, right? So the European Union was like, okay, we just give money to every country, deal with the situation.
You figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, you figure it out. Here's money, just money, we give it to you, and you deal with it. You save jobs, you give it to people to, like, survive being unemployed, buy medical supplies, pay doctors and nurses and so on. That's what most countries did, right? They got the money from the EU and they spent all of it on all of these things. I think we're the only country that saved money from the coronavirus crisis. Like, where did this money go? Yeah.
And so where do you think it goes? Do you think it's just in the
people.
pockets of the oligarchs and the politicians?
That's how it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, most often. You just have all of these business people that are ridiculously rich, and it's unfounded. You can't really trace back the money.
Yeah.
Right. So all of these funds are coming in, and then all of these people are getting richer. So I can't present any concrete evidence, obviously.
Yeah.
This is kind of my interpretation, but you can connect the dots there.
For sure. And that's sort of ties in, it sounds like, what you're saying about the media, and I'm going to butcher this, but Dylan Pivsky.
That's pretty good.
He
A for effort.
So he owns 80% of the media in Bulgaria. Is that sort of a representation of what you're saying? Like, everything is monopolized. There's no freedom. There's no free market. Like, there's no competition. So these people that are sort of in power, are they just always going to be winning? Is that the problem? Is that what the mafia sort of is?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, because there are plenty of examples of people doing business and, doing their own thing. The issue is that when they get too big, when they become visible, these smaller businesses, let's say, then someone higher up might get involved, because then they're encroaching on their territory and they want to protect that. And with the media in particular, I think that's one of the biggest problems, because if you don't have freedom of media and freedom of speech, and you can't inform people properly, then, the people who are kind of, I wouldn't say engaging in criminal activity, just because I don't think that's...
Allegedly.
Right, allegedly. Then they can just get away with it, right? You can't inform people of what's going on. If you're controlling the narrative, then you can just do whatever you want.
For sure, yeah.
And that's a big problem.
Do you notice that living in Bulgaria, that the news that you're fed is somewhat biased or not honest, or what do you see when you open the news? Like, what's an example? Like, what are your frustrations?
I think, thankfully, like, our generation doesn't really watch the news. We have a lot of alternative media, like independent newspapers, online platforms.
The Rocky Road Post.
Investigative journalists and such. And I get my news from the internet and from these media that I've decided that I trust them. But this is us, so my parents and my grandparents watch the news, and a lot of people in the not in Sofia, in the rest of the country, watch the news. And because of all these scandals, because of all these things that have been happening, I've turned on the news this year, and it's awful. I can give the example with one of the Lampevski's newspapers. I just saw a title. I just saw it in the store. I saw this giant title during the protest that said 30 hooligans are what was it? 30 hooligans are terrorizing Sofia.
Sofia.
Talking about the protests. Like, first of all, it wasn't 30 of us. It was like, it was like 30,000. I don't know. And we weren't, like, the protests weren't terrorizing Sofia. It was a protest. Like, you could go on and protest. But that's the sort of... And if you think that this is 80% of our media, because 80% of our media is his... Yeah.
Do you know where he stands politically?
He is an MP.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Right.
he is in parliament.
The plot.
Okay, right.
Yeah, he is this giant oligarch that owns so many businesses and most of the media, and he is in parliament he's not from the ruling party, he's from one of they're like a coalition.
Okay, yeah.
He's
Are they so you're saying they're centrist? It's the GERB or P?
GERB, yeah.
GERB.
Mm-hmm.
P or B?
B.
B.
Yeah.
B.
Like B?
B.
Like
Okay,
B.
yeah.
Bubble, yeah.
And so they are centrist right.
Mm-hmm.
They're the conservatives.
I'm not even sure what's like conservative.
I
liberal
don't
here.
think you can really apply that here.
No,
Okay.
it's
as
different.
much.
Yeah. But the Lampejski, he's from one of the ruling parties, which is the Ethnic Party, which is actually the ruling party tried to, when. No, I'm gonna get into something else. Sorry. No.
Too deep.
Yeah, no, I was gonna explain a whole other branch of our politics.
You can.
I don't think I can.
Okay,
So let's move on.
Okay, so talking about politics, let's talk about communism. Communism is sort of regarded as this, at least in my opinion, like true communism back in the Soviet days. What is the influence of communism in Bulgaria in 2020, and how does it look?
What do you mean by communism?
Do you mean
So
the-
Bulgaria is regarded as a very communist country, whether that's true or not. Like when people think of Bulgaria, communism is definitely associated, and whether that's historical or present is for you guys to tell me.
I would say socialist, just to make the difference between communist Russia and the socialist
Of course.
states. We were in Bulgaria, wasn't a part of the Soviet Union. Also, we had great influence from them, but we're mostly influenced by them. But I think
that's also very important to
Yeah.
differentiate socialism and communism.
Mhm.
So could you perhaps do that, please?
I never lived through any of it, so I'm not sure I can. But
Because I think that when people were like, oh, Bulgaria is so communist, but there's still, I was like, no, it might be socialist, but it's not communist, because there's still so many capitalist institutions which are used in socialism rather
Yeah.
than the Bolshevik
yeah,
communism, which people throw around that term very loosely. But saying that, there's still a lot of communist statues around, and there is a lot of Soviet history. What is your reaction, or what do you guys say when people think that Bulgaria is communist or communist influenced? And if it's socialism influenced, then make the difference.
I mean, I think that, right, if we wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, the kind of differences ideologically and systemically between socialism and communism, it would take up too much time. But if we...
If you wrap that up.
There was this fantastic image. I think it was... they use cows as examples, right? So what is... what would happen with a cow in like different systems. And I think it was in socialism. In socialism, the state... Wait, I'm going to look it up actually because I think it's brilliant. Okay. Let me find that. Do you want to talk about... You know what I think is interesting? If you kind of inform the audience of... like how the political system was formed through communism, like how people came to power, because it's interesting. I don't know if they're familiar with our prime minister's background, like what his previous job was.
I can
And his
summarize
This
it.
is the current Prime Minister, Borisov.
Borisov, yeah.
Yes.
So basically, we had like, we were under socialism till 1989, and we had this dictator, yeah. So our current prime minister was this guy's bodyguard at the time. So you can see how they're connected. Then socialism fell, and then forward 15 years, this guy is in power. And a lot of the people who were in some way involved in the in politics during socialism, but weren't in power, so they were like kind of somewhere there, they are in power now. And that's why people now make the connection between the ruling party and the communists, even though we have a socialist party that was rooted in our communist party from back then. People now associate, like people who think, in my opinion, associate a ruling party, Borisov's party, with the communists.
Yeah, sounds exactly like Putin working for the KGB.
Kind of, yeah.
Like,
A little bit, yeah.
and then the division of, so with the split of the Soviet Union, was there a similar sort of effect on the division of wealth towards, like, how did the oligarchs get all their money, essentially? When did that happen?
I mean, I think that kind of has its roots in socialism as it was here, because very often, right, the idea was to give people jobs and apartments and whatever, and then the state would fund that, and oftentimes the price for that would be political allegiance, right? So I can give you an example in Serbia, where my grandmother lives. So her neighbor she doesn't get paid. I don't think she's allowed to be paid, but she is gifted, I think, timber and such, right, for burning in the winter in exchange for going to protests and protesting against the opposition or something, right? So you would do kind of political favors in exchange for other favors for yourself. And often it was the most committed and loyal of these people that then got positions afterwards in politics. And that goes back to the needing connections to do anything. So you might have people who don't necessarily have a background in politics. Maybe they were, I don't know, say a bodyguard, and then they came to power and then they became prime ministers, not because they were educated and pursued it, but just because they were there and they had the right connections. So in that sense, I think it's definitely had an effect because these people are still in power, right? And many of these oligarchs got there in that way. And I wouldn't say socialism enabled it, but it definitely gave it that push, right? Because of things like what I mentioned in the example.
So what do you think would happen to Bulgaria if there was more of a capitalism-based influence in terms of economics?
Historically, or
in the future,
now?
if it was to happen?
I mean, it gets a little tricky there, just because these things...
In terms of like privatizing industries.
But that's an economic system, it's not a political system, so...
But it's definitely tied. I mean, capitalism,
sure.
like publicizing...
It is, but it takes
time.
Right, that's the problem, that I think...
Do you think that would be one solution for, say, this MP that owns 80% of the media? If, you know, man, I guess that's private at the same time.
Wait, would you
So what I'm trying to say is, like, if capitalist-based ideology or, like, objectives, like, are instilled in Bulgaria, would that help any of the corruption?
I don't think that's that's the problem, whether it's socialist or capitalist or whatever. I think, and what we've seen with this protest that's been going on for, 3 months, is that it's like the protests have a moral dimension. It's not a political dimension. It's not, and that's what's unique about what's happening right now, because all of these people with so many different political allegiances and political orientation come together to protest one thing, which is corruption, for example, so it doesn't.
For sure. Okay, so it's more of a good versus bad.
Exactly.
Sort of,
So because you have socialists at this protest, you have, I don't know, like capitalists, you have centre-rights, you have environmentalists, you have everybody, young, old, doesn't matter. You have these people that come together to protest the way that the country is being led, but they don't necessarily have the same like political allegiances
Yeah.
or the same ideas about what would happen next.
I think that's an interesting point, because now in modern day society we've sort of like pushed, especially by the media, into thinking that everything is either capitalism or socialism
Binary,
or left
yeah.
versus right. It's so polarized.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's a really important point, that this protest might not have to be about, you know, socialism or like what party you're standing for. It can still be about moral or ethical.
I think that's probably
issues.
why it's finally happening on this scale, because people have, I mean, and this is just my opinion, right? I feel like people have been very quiet and haven't really done much to protest, aside from the big protest in 2013. Right?
Yeah, but that was political as well. That was
Right,
not,
right.
It's not the same, yeah.
But I think it's just corruption is so prevalent that people, they don't see any alternative, right? And because it is political, they've just been quiet. But now it's gone beyond political, and it's gotten to this deeply moral question of, are we really going to continue to be okay with, you know, having this happen around us continuously, with the corruption, with the influence, with the, you know, the...
People are sort of fed up with the like
exactly,
politics.
fed up.
It's
We've
just
had
like, it's not about that anymore.
It's just, it's gotten insulting at this point,
Yeah,
you know, because
yeah.
there's corruption everywhere. It is. I feel insulted. I think that especially with the incident at the beach, like, because that wasn't necessarily political. That was just very human. And that was just insulting, because you see this person who is going, and I mean, it's a little comic as well, because he's going on this like little rubber boat, and he's like carrying this flag, and he's like going to the beach, and he just wants to like plant his flag on the beach, which is like public property. And then you have this very kind of, it's very Balkan that these men in like tracksuits and hats who are like bald are coming and like pushing him into the water. And he's like, identify yourselves. And they're just like,
are you
pushing
guards?
him
Are
into
you what?
yeah,
Like,
and they're just pushing him into the water.
Can I ask why is there so many Eastern Europeans love like G style raw, like sort of like tight t-shirts with like the sort of little diamonds, like plastic diamonds everywhere on the t-shirts?
we don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
not
know.
the people
Just
to
for the
ask.
men, but, like, they're all jacked and like, you know, shaved heads and like look like they'd kill me at least in about 3 seconds. Okay, let's talk about the chief prosecutor, Ivan Geshev. Ivan Geshev. So there's been a lot of controversy about him. Tell us about him.
Okay, so I'm really happy that these protests are not just wanting the Prime Minister's resignation. They're very focused on the Chief Prosecutor's resignation, which has never happened in Bulgaria. I don't know if it happens, like who protests like against the Chief Prosecutor? Like, he's the guy who's supposed to work for the public interest, right? To fight the bad guys or whatever. But basically the protests against this guy started before he was elected. So he was suggested by the High Court, and people were like, is he qualified? Because he was the only their only suggestion, right? So it wasn't even a vote, like it was like a ceremony to vote him in. But
and so were people annoyed with the process or the person? Or
the
both?
person, because before that he was second to the chief prosecutor, right? He was, what's it called? Zamestnik.
Whatever, the vice
chief prosecutor or whatever. And he was involved in some of the big cases from the past years. There was this case with this big bank that they were, what were they? It was like 6-7 years ago, so I wasn't very, like, I didn't really read about it, but something big happened, and he was the one investigating, right? And he had somehow missed. So it was about money laundering, I think.
Yeah.
He was the one who missed the initials DP, so Delampevsky, in the documents, right? So this guy, Delampevsky, was never in any way, not prosecuted, just like asked questions about this case with money laundering. And Ivan Geshev was the prosecutor in charge of this case. So even from like 6-7 years ago when this happened, people could see that he doesn't look the right way when he when he like prosecutes people. Like, it's the same what's happening now. He never goes after the politicians. He never goes after people from the ruling party. He doesn't go after the allegation. Like, he doesn't investigate the allegations that Prime Minister Borisov has like a house in Barcelona that he bought with laundered money, right?
Okay, right.
Yeah. So
just turns a blind eye to his friends or the
Exactly. So when he got when they suggested him for chief prosecutor, there were these massive protests that achieved nothing because they elected him anyway. Then the president was like, he had the option not to sign his to sign him into the position, and he did that, which was one of the clashes with the prosecution, with our judicial system, with Prime Minister Borisov. But then he could only do this once, so they elected him anyway. So yeah, there are so many examples of how pointed his cases are, at people who are not they don't suit the ruling party, but he never goes after people like his friends, as you said.
So I want to talk about a solution in politics. We'll get to that, but let's say two functions or aims of the protests, not the only ones, but two of them are for Borisov to step down and Geshev, right? The Prime Minister and the Chief Prosecutor. If they do step down, who should be elected, and is that the only thing that needs to be fixed, or is it more of a process that needs to change? Is it the whole system needs to change? Because of course protesting is very necessary and it's good, but there also needs to be a solution, right? For it to be worthwhile.
I think that's one of the most interesting questions in this whole situation generally. I think where people are very united is that they want change, but they can't really agree on the next step. And I think that's why some people take issue with the protests as well. They're saying that, well, what's the point? What are you trying to achieve? So what's going to happen, right? They resign, and then what? You're not offering any kind of alternative. You're just saying boo to this, but then why don't you offer anything else? Personally, I think that it's going to be a gradual change. I think the most important thing is that there is some kind of common identity forming and some kind of common push towards change. So currently, I don't think there is... How do I phrase this as diplomatically and neutrally as possible? I don't think
you don't need
there's...
to be neutral.
I'm trying for my own sake to be. I think the options are more or less on the same level. So I don't think that one party will be that much better than the other. That I think is generally a big reason why young people don't vote, because they don't see any kind of alternative. They just see it as mostly all the same. Some might be better than others, but I don't think if someone new comes in power, things will immediately change. But I don't think that's the point either. I think the point is more so that there is this fire within people now for change and
for accountability.
Yes. So whoever comes into power next, if people know that they have the power to change things, to demand change, then there will also be more accountability. There will be, then change will happen gradually. And I think with time, personally, I feel like it's a matter of education. I think young people need to get educated here or abroad, and then come back, and then they need to take these positions for things to really change. Because right now, this is all a very similar demographic that you can choose between for political leaders.
Would you consider the current protests a revolution?
Revolutions don't achieve anything, I think, in the long term. So wouldn't call it. But
it did
I think
in
it's a
Soviet
revolution
Russia.
in thinking.
The Russian Revolution.
Yes, you're okay. Yeah,
And the
but-
French Revolution as well.
But you can't really
but
compare
when you
this,
when you
right?
change the
It's not
system
No, we don't.
very
I'm just asking.
rapidly, it kind of goes down after a bit, and you need to have another revolution. But you're right, revolution in thinking, I would agree, because I had, like, on the 12th day of the protest, I had this reporter come to me and ask me, it's the 12th day and nothing is happening. What do you think about it? It's like, no, it's not like nothing is happening just because they don't want to resign. I see so many people on the streets that I haven't seen before. I see so many young people that have never been interested in politics, but now they're listening and they're insulted, as you said. They're insulted in the way our government and our institutions are treating us, and are stealing from us, and they don't even try to hide it. I saw so many people that I honestly believe have never voted in their life, but they're gonna vote at the next elections because now they see what's happening. So this is a change, and this is, in this sense, it could be like a revolution, I guess. And this is because you asked, like, what's next. I think we summarized this, but no matter who comes in power, it's important to have these people, like, pay attention, and the next person who comes in power, the next party that comes in power, wouldn't be like, okay, we can do anything we want, and they're just not gonna react, right? Because people are gonna react next time.
It's probably going to be a gradual decrease in poor behavior on the parts of politicians. But I think that's good. You know, every little step matters, and I think this is the first step towards a better political system.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, like, I completely agree with, but when you're talking about how people should become educated, whether that's foreign or in the country, and then come back and take these positions, that sounds like it could be extremely hard when you have this system where the only people that can, regardless of their education, acquire these positions are people with connections, right? So is there sort of like a hamster roll, or whatever the expression is? Like, what I'm trying to get to is, should there be intervention from other countries or the EU, whoever that may be, to get rid of this corruption and change the system? Because even now you're saying that if these people step down, it may likely be another person that does the same thing. So obviously foreign intervention is extremely controversial, especially if it's military wise, but, like, do you think another country needs to step in, or do you think even if it's not a physical intervention, like, be reported on more, or do you think Bulgaria can sort this issue of corruption out itself?
No, I don't believe that. Because we are a part of, like, bigger, like, the world is so global right now that you can't actually be solving this crisis on our own means that we're an independent nation, and we're not. First of all, we're part of the European Union, and I believe that the European Union should in some way intervene here, because there are institutions that, like Bulgarian institutions, that are part of the bigger, like, European family. And there are rules and there are laws. That's a big problem here, especially with on the topic of the chief prosecutor, that we don't live in a lawful country, right? Some, like, the European laws or procedures do not really apply because of the people who hold these positions here. And the European has turned a blind eye on this whole situation. Until the point where, like, protesters were like, EU, are you blind? This was like a big hashtag. And and this is
so why are they not intervening? Why are they turning a blind eye?
I think it's because Borisov suits them, because his party kind of does what they want.
So what does that mean though? Like, what does the EU want?
Not the EU, more like European leaders. Like, there's so many memes.
It's just bureaucracy. Again, it always comes down to bureaucracy. That's kind of, I feel, why they're turning a blind eye, because they need him, right? First, they're in coalition in the European Parliament, so they need him on his side. And then also, it suits them to have someone whom they can influence as they please. Because Bulgaria is a strategically very important geopolitical nation. And it's right in between all of these other very important players. So you have Turkey on the one hand, you have Russia on the other hand. It's also the gateway towards Europe then. So it's very important that the EU has control over things that are happening. And it's easier for them to do that if they have someone who is loyal to them, let's say.
Who's not looking for autonomy for the country. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
right.
Or he's not even working, as we've seen, I think, for people's interest, like his own people's interest. He's working for his own interest. So it's very easy to manipulate such a player. Not even manipulate him, just buy him off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the problem is he's not fighting for an independent Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Well, what is an independent Bulgaria? I mean, once you are in any kind of union, you're no longer as independent. Obviously, sovereignty is the cornerstone of in the international arena, but these states are interconnected and codependent, and in that sense, I don't think it's necessarily that much about independence. I think it's mostly just kind of staying in control, maintaining security first and foremost, because this is, again, a very important geopolitical destination. You also have the Black Sea, right, right there. So it's very important for them to know what's going on and control what's going on. And in that sense, Borisov just suits them.
Right. Okay, so freedom of speech, what does that look like in Bulgaria? Is there...
Freedom of what? Where?
Is there, legislation against what you can and cannot say? Is there, in communist Russia, can you go to jail for,
no.
expressions of...
I don't think we have legislation that controls...
Not officially. Well...
Right, well, that's where
Yeah.
what it comes down to always here.
So, Reporters Without Borders, this researches they do every year about freedom of speech in all the countries in the world, not just in Europe. We're surprisingly last in Europe by freedom of speech, and by a lot. We're at 111th place in the world, and they take into account we have a lot of cases of journalists being fired, being beaten up, a couple killed, but I don't think that was think about no. It's no. I don't think. I think these were incidents actually. It was maybe one.
They have better ways of doing it. They have better ways. They don't need to resort to that.
Yeah. Sorry, I mentioned that I wasn't on the topic. But
no, make it a little spicier. Add something to the conversation.
Also, as we saw, 80% of the media being controlled by one person, which is just ridiculous.
But can you go out and say whatever you want? Or would you be punished for that?
I could, because I don't have a platform. Nobody's going to hear me. I have my Facebook page.
That's a great point.
But when you have a platform, when you have a voice, when you have some sort of when you're a journalist that has some sort of media outlet, influence, it could be a problem. I haven't seen it in person, but there were cases of reporters being arrested at protests, not this year, but last year. I've seen this.
This year as well, it's happening.
This year, maybe, yeah. So
there's some guy working for the New Yorker. That might be right.
Oh, yeah.
That got bashed by police or something like that.
Heard about
but
that.
saying that, you never know the full story.
Yeah.
So freedom of speech, yeah.
Okay, so are there any misconceptions about Bulgaria from Western Europe or America, or
we've both been
are there any
abroad,
things that are annoying?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. That
both been what?
We've studied
lived
abroad.
Yeah, so
we get trashed quite a bit, honestly. I mean, I get trashed quite a bit for being Balkan. It's kind of, well, so where are you from? And then people are like, oh, I'm from Norway, I'm from the United States. And I'm like, I'm from Bulgaria. And they're like, are you now? I'm like,
yeah. I had somebody was telling me the story. They were like, oh, I'm from Bulgaria. And somebody was like, oh, is this the capital of Macedonia? Which is, no, please. Yeah, well, I don't know. I think like because we've been students abroad, so I don't think it's such a big problem because universities in Europe are quite diverse, and people don't tend to assume that much. But we have a lot. There are a lot of Bulgarians working abroad, and they work really shitty jobs because that's what they can get. Like they're cheap labor, right? So
because the minimum wage here is extremely low as well.
Yeah.
Right?
It is.
So they're sort of used to that when they go overseas and people take advantage.
Well, it's more that the employers know that that's the case, so they just take advantage of it.
And they work in awful conditions as well. And a lot of them are from the Roma population as well, the ones that I know that work on plantations and stuff like that, fields. And so a lot of Europe thinks that Bulgaria is just gypsies.
But that feeds into the problem, actually.
Yeah.
Right? That because you have these people who are willing to go abroad and work literally any job just to earn like a tiny amount more, that's what people see. And so, you know, take Brexit for example. They had a huge problem. The population had a huge problem with I think it was especially Romanian and Polish citizens going and
And
Or
Bulgaria.
like unskilled labor jobs and stuff.
yeah, just generally they had issues with the foreigners, right? And
they don't realize that all the Bulgarians, Romanians, and Polish do in England, for example, is do the jobs that nobody else wants to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
But then that's also what they see, right? So then they associate it with us.
Yeah.
Then it's like, oh yeah, so these people, all I see them doing is these low-skilled jobs, and you know, so this is what they are. And I mean, it doesn't really help that we're so far down in all of the rankings, like,
yeah, definitely.
or up if it's like most corrupt. But you know, we don't really rank very well. So I can understand that when you haven't been here, when you haven't met the people, when you haven't experienced the good, and if you're just reading kind of black on white, so there's so much corruption, freedom of speech is iffy, you know, education is not great.
Yeah.
I think we score pretty low there as well.
I think
in the
every year
EU.
it just goes down.
Because before I got here, like I was told like, oh, like Sofia is like it's not very nice, like it's dangerous and stuff like that. And I got here, it's like it's beautiful. Like there's heaps of cool bars and restaurants. And it's like good nightlife. Like
Sofie's cool, but that's just here. Like the rest of no. The rest of like Sofia is not the whole of Bulgaria, and the rest of Bulgaria, like most places, are a lot poorer than here, and the infrastructure is like not at that level. Education as well. So
I mean, most people here who want to do something and grow and develop come to Sofia. You know, they don't really stay in the countryside. Like I don't know anyone who wanted to do something great or like become successful or earn money or whatever, and then they went like to the countryside.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know a single person. You know, it's not like if you go to France and then it's like, well, just pick any city, you know, just pick one of the many and it's going to be fantastic. Here, this is basically the place.
There's little opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
No worries. Make sure to follow the Rocky Road Post on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.